Today on CityCast Houston, the library is usually a calm, drama-free environment, but tension at Houston public libraries is changing that notion. Plus, the EPA has released their first report regarding the cancer cluster in Fifth Ward. And what can we do about all of those scooters in downtown? Houston Landing's education reporter Asher Lehrer-Small joins me to break down the stories impacting H-Town. It's Tuesday, April 2nd. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Asher, welcome back to CityCast Houston. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Raheel. I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I know it's been a busy time for you. HISD is a story that keeps on giving, and man, there's been a lot of reporting. I love this story that you had earlier this week about the students' perspective of what all of these changes mean under Mike Miles. Can you summarize this for us? Like, was there one big takeaway from what the students told you?
Sure, 100%. I appreciate you highlighting that one because every once in a while we try to take a step back and just take stock of how big these changes really are. Superintendent Mike Miles describes it as the biggest overhaul to any school district, the biggest school reform effort in modern history. And I think he's really right about that in terms of the scope of the changes and the number of schools and students impacted, because Houston ISD is the biggest district in Texas and one of the biggest districts in the country. So when we take stock of that, we really want to hear from the students because they're the ones that are living the changes in real time. And they usually have a pretty good read on, am I learning more? Am I learning less? Am I feeling engaged? Am I feeling like tuned out? And the biggest takeaway I had was that, yes, it seems like in some ways the rigor has increased, but at the same time, a lot of students felt like the changes were more busy work and that often they were more playing along and playing a part than actually seeing the new methods implemented to the fullest. A lot of students described being in classes where teachers would kind of just teach as regular, but then when there was a assistant principal, district person who would step into the class for an observation, the teacher would kind of change their teaching style, throw in some, you could call it there, it's like write on a whiteboard or like talk to a partner, or there are even students who said like, hey, we have folks who look out in the hallway, see if anyone's coming to observe the classroom. We give a little signal and then everybody puts their phone away because normally the teacher doesn't care, but when there's someone observing, they do care. So it's just interesting because if you went to public school, this probably doesn't sound so unfamiliar. It's just kind of how things happen in practice. But just given the tight ship that the superintendent has portrayed the district as, it was interesting to hear some of these contrasting perspectives.
Yeah, and that was my big takeaway too, was like, man, it sounds like HISD, they're on this rigorous schedule and the daily quizzes, and we have to implement these types of things. And in reality, it's just business as usual. But hey, when somebody comes down the hallway, everyone, let's go get back to, like showcase that you're doing this NES stuff. So you can read the entire thing with the link in our show notes. It is a really interesting read. So I appreciate you, going in and talking to the students and learning a little bit about what their experience is. Now, Asher, let's get to your biggest story to start the week. What do you think it is?
Yeah, so the biggest story for me is kind of recapping this craziness from last week that went down in the Houston Public Library system. So, you know, the libraries, it's kind of a place that, you typically think of it as a cozy spot to go get a book. But for months now, especially at the end of Mayor Turner's time in office, there was some headlines about how folks were really unsatisfied working in the department. So there was high rates of turnover, and actually the Houston Public Library system, if you're looking at their employees, they had the second highest rate of dissatisfaction except for the firefighters in the whole city for all city employees.
Wow.
So there were some problems for a while. And then last week, everything kind of hit the fan. And I'll shout out my colleague, Maggie Gordon, has done some incredible reporting on this. She's been covering it all along. But on Tuesday, she reported how the Montrose Library branch was deteriorating, and there's actually a contract like already inked out such that St. Thomas University can take over ownership of the branch if it ever doesn't operate for 30 days in a row, and that the branch itself was deteriorating. And so she got this communication of a library employee who's talking about, like, I'll just read the quote. She's like, "The Freed Montrose Library is without phone and internet service, and also our elevator is out, and also it's very cold in the building."
Oh
And
my
so this
God.
is 2 minutes before the branch is supposed to open. She's emailing a supervisor, and so you can kind of see that there are these real issues here. Um, and then the very next day, the city announced that the branch is going to permanently close due to, quote, safety concerns. So that was pretty quick impact after the story. And so we're already like, okay, a lot's going on with the library. But then the next day, on Thursday, Mayor Whitmire replaced the director of the Houston Public Library System. And she had been in her role for 19 years. And now the interim director, her name is Cynthia Wilson. And she's a former HISD administrator, former Dallas ISD administrator. Yeah, it looks like they're really trying to take on that issue in the Whitmire administration.
Yeah, you mentioned Maggie's reporting, and it was last year in August where the first bombshell reporting came out about Houston Public Library and how employees are leaving. There's a toxic culture of fear, and that really started that scope of, hey, we need to fix this, and nothing was really done. So here's another example, and this is going to be a theme in today's episode of Mayor Whitmire. When there's something wrong, he's attempting to fix it, right? How those results are going to play out, we'll see. But yeah, it was pretty shocking that they made this move and replaced Rhea Lawson.
It's just funny because I never really, I wouldn't have thought of like the library as like a saucy beat, but here
Yeah,
we are, and there's all this drama.
I know. It really has become that. Ooh, what's happening at the libraries? What?
Yeah.
Hold on. This isn't good. All right, my biggest story to start the week, the EPA has released their first set of results regarding the cancer cluster in Fifth Ward caused by the Union Pacific rail yard contamination. They found that 8% of the 51 sites had elevated levels of chemicals, and they did detect the creosote-related chemicals in the soil and water. And this process is going to take a little bit longer, but this is the first report that everybody was waiting for regarding this cancer cluster in Fifth Ward. And by the way, we did a really thorough episode with Pooja Lodia of ABC 13 that I've linked in the show notes if you want to understand more about what exactly is happening, what the city is doing, what the plans are to help the residents out. But everybody was waiting for this really important EPA report. And I'm citing these numbers from Houston Landing. So if you want to read that, that's there as well. But we now have our first sense of like, okay, the EPA has weighed in on this, and there's still a lot more data to be refined and to process. So we can learn a lot more about these cancer causing chemicals that residents have known about, the city has known about, and now we're finally getting that official report.
Yeah, and this is such important stuff too, because the fact that there's attention being drawn to this issue, these are poisonous chemicals, and a lot of folks who live there don't know. I know that one of my colleagues, Elena Bruis, did some reporting to show that when folks were moving into this area, a realtor would never show them that there are these dangerous things under the ground, and that they could be being exposed to something that could actually give them cancer. And so the fact that now there's more attention on this, that there's testing going on, that folks are figuring out what chemicals might be too high and what steps might need to be taken, that's really important.
Yeah, and not only that, Pooja was telling us that there were still new developments being approved over there with the information that is known, right? But I guess everyone was waiting for this report. Like, okay, once the EPA officially says it, then we can maybe stop or figure out the next steps. But everyone kind of knew about it for the longest time, and yet new developments were still being put up and were worked on. So it's just a wild story, and it's a story that, as you mentioned, like it's a good thing that we're finally getting this data. We've gotten the reporting on this, and now we figure out the next steps. But this bombshell report, everybody's been waiting on it, and it's finally out. And you can read the entire thing, including all the chemicals and the levels that the EPA found in the Houston Landing story. All right, Asher, are you ready for some rapid fire? You've never done this with us.
I never have. I'll try to get ready.
All right, let's get to it. If you've been in downtown lately, then you know just how many scooters are out and about, buzzing around the streets. And whether it be rental companies that are doing tours or pop up shops that are just renting them out where you can get through downtown, they are everywhere. And especially at night, like every time I'm there at night, it is scary driving around because you just see these little scooters buzzing around. And every city has had this issue, right? Some cities have just banned scooters outright. Well, with Houston, there's really not many regulations outside of not riding them on sidewalks around business districts. And by the way, why would you want to ride those scooters on sidewalks ever? Because the sidewalks are not good in downtown and they're so uneven, you're just going to fall and break something. But now this is interesting to me because how is this all going to play out? Because we have reporting on this. Houston Public Media is where I'm getting this report from. And if there's one thing that we've seen from Mayor Whitmire's administration is that if residents bring a concern up in the media, they will try to solve it. Yeah, whether it be with the short-term rentals, now with this. I'm curious how this all plays out. And what are your thoughts on these scooters, by the way?
Well, I'm curious too. My first thought is that they're pretty fun. I've ridden them a couple times, and you definitely get a little bit of a thrill when you're riding on it. It's funny you say, why would you ever want to ride on the sidewalk? Because the sidewalks are so torn up and often uneven, but you're kind of between a rock and a hard place because riding on the street can be really dangerous, especially with Houston traffic. So, riding them in Houston, I would be pretty scared to do that, to be honest. But I think it's, as you said, one of those issues. It'll be interesting to see what the mayor does around it. He's signaled that he's pretty hesitant to make changes that will cut down on the lanes of traffic. I think a lot of like pedestrian or bike advocates would say, hey, we need more bike lanes. We need more, street crossings, this sort of thing to make methods of transportation safe, like biking or like these scooters. But, we saw in Houston Avenue, the mayor was like, as soon as he got into office, he removed the medians that Mayor Turner had been putting in. And so there's this push to like, hey, we're not going to impede the lanes of traffic on the roads. Personally, I think that it's a good trade off because it allows for a little more safety and more modes of transportation like these scooters or bikes.
The big traffic safety initiative, Vision Zero, last week was also in the news because that's what you're referencing. Like, hey, what is that perfect balance? Everyone wants to get zero pedestrian, cyclist deaths on the road, right? So we want to aim for this. But Mary Benton, the spokesperson for Mayor John Whitmire, said that that initiative will be one of many tools the city will utilize in transportation planning. So it's not something they're going to live by or die by, but it is something they're going to use. And that's where everyone was like, really? Like, I thought we could all agree that we want zero deaths, right, with pedestrians and cyclists. But yeah, nonetheless, this is going to be another thing that the administration has to deal with. And by the way, Asher, you are brave because I have two major rules in life: never get on those scooters and never go to a trampoline park because those are just injuries waiting to happen. So I'm out.
Well, I've broken both of your rules, but I will also tell you, not because of those two things, but I've had 4 concussions in my life. So, probably best to be careful.
This episode is brought to you by ShipStation. If you run an e-commerce business, you know how much work it takes to produce something great while dealing with complicated shipping issues. That's why over 130,000 companies have turned to ShipStation, an innovative tool that allows you to focus less on shipping and more on building your brand. With ShipStation, you can manage orders, label printing, reporting, and customer service on one easy-to-use dashboard. You'll reduce warehouse costs with reliable enterprise solutions and save thousands on shipping costs with discounts up to 89% off. Plus, you can effortlessly import orders from everywhere you sell online. So, turn your shipping challenges into opportunities for growth. Go to ShipStation.com and use code POD to sign up for your free 60-day trial. That's ShipStation.com, code POD.
Okay, we're coming off of Easter Sunday, Asher, and Houston, by the way, is one of the most religious major metros, with 46% of citizens saying that they attend at least one religious service once a year, with 24% of that 46% attending 12 or more services a year. Now, 39% of the people surveyed by the Pew Research Center said that they do not attend any religious services per year. Now, in terms of other major metros, we are pretty religious. Seattle led the nation with 66% not attending any religious ceremonies throughout the year. And nationally, more than 21% of Americans say they have no religious affiliations. And this data is coming out, and I just found it interesting. Like, hey, we are a pretty religious city, and it makes sense, right? You've got big churches like Lakewood. You've got so many diverse people living here of religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. And it is interesting to see that we are pretty high up. In fact, the best when it comes to attending at least one religious service a year.
Yeah, and another interesting piece of that report I found was that a good amount of adults across the country, actually about half, said that they felt some level of tension between their religious beliefs and
Mm.
mainstream culture, which was up from 42% a few years back. That's always interesting to me because it's a balance to stay true to, a religious upbringing, but also kind of have your own thoughts and have your own beliefs. I will say that this Ramadan, I went to my first iftar. I'm Jewish, so I'd never been to an iftar, and I had a friend invite me, and it was a nice event. I think this was a little more casual one than maybe some folks. This was just more of a potluck. We played some card games, but it's really cool to be in a city where there's so many folks of different religions and getting to experience those different cultures.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the great things about living here is, right? You get to learn about different religions, different cultures that you might never get to if you live in other cities because we're so diverse. But yeah, that is the journey that everybody goes on, right? Everyone has their own personal religious journey, and you sometimes you fall out of it, sometimes you start questioning it, and as you mentioned, like so many adults around the nation are trying to balance all that out, and it's so interesting to see everyone's journey and you learn about it, but yeah, I mean, just for me personally, I can tell you that life is a cycle, right? Like when I was growing up, we would go to prayers every single day. My parents would force us to go. When I got to college, it was like once a week, right? And then after college, when I'm working, it was like once a month. But then when you have kids, you go through that cycle again. And I'm there pretty much every single day for prayers because I have to take my daughter. So it's funny how it all plays out, but life is a cycle and the numbers are backing this up. So interesting data there.
And I will say that I think your kids will thank you because it's one of those things where I remember being a kid, my parents dragging me to Hebrew school, me hating it and being like, this is just boring and a waste of time. But now as an adult, I wonder what I would have to fall back on if I didn't have those experiences. And so even if it's something that as a kid you don't realize the purpose to, I think as an adult, it's a really important source of identity.
Identity and community. I think that's like the one thing that I've noticed is I always took for granted the community that comes with religion, right? Like we always think about the spiritual side of it, and which is great for, whatever you practice, but the community that comes with it, that community is always going to be there with you and help you out. So that's something that my daughter loves. Like she loves going. So I'm happy. Like I don't have to drag her. Like my parents would have to drag us. I'm like, do I really have to miss Monday Night Raw for, prayer? Like, can we not go today? But yeah, you're right. You do appreciate it as you get older.
That's awesome.
All right, Asher, it's another day, which means it's another restaurant beef here in the city of Houston. This time it's the beloved Trill Burgers. I'm going to try to break this down for everyone, okay? So here's what happened. Everyone's kind of heard about the lawsuit now, but Trill Burgers was suing former founders Benson and Patsy Vivares after they funneled $45,000 from Trill Burgers to their restaurant, Sticky's Chicken. Then, in a counterclaim, the Vivares said, no, we're actually suing Trill Burgers founders Bun B, Nick Scurfield, who has been on our podcast, by the way, the Best Burgers episode, linked in your show notes, and then Andy Wynn for trying to kick them out of their ownership stake. Everybody's due back in court April 30th, and this is wild to me because Charles Adams, aka Big Angry, is representing Trill Burgers. He's friends with Bun B and everyone there. He went on Instagram and was like, you know what? If the other attorney is going to play this out in the media, I'm just going to post all the receipts that I have and screenshot it, everything, and put it up on Instagram. And now is like winning this media war that's happening between both sides. This is so crazy to me. And the Houston drama that's happening on the restaurant scene is unbelievable right now.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it's funny too, just because, this is someone who's ultimately a rapper, but he's become this Houston icon. He opens Trill Burgers. I will out myself. I have yet to go
Ooh.
because everything I've heard is that, it's a $20 burger for a smash burger. So, you say what you will, but I think I live by Burger Bodega, so for half the price. Um, but following the restaurant drama in Houston is always interesting. I love to eat out whenever I can. I did see unfortunate news from Fat Eatery, the chef and owner of that restaurant, passed away last week. But I've been there, and that place is one of the most delicious restaurants I've ever been to. So, really sad news there.
Yeah, just really sad news about Chef Alex Ouyang, who was battling cancer, and yeah, the tragic passing. And Fat Eatery is such a great place. I posted this on Instagram when he passed away. He was on our food episode about Katy Asian Town, and he was so gracious with his time. He did it right before the restaurant was opening, and he's like, "No worries, man. Like, we'll figure this out." And he gave us all the recommendations. He pumped up every restaurant across him, and never like he didn't do it like, oh no, like they're kind of good. No, he built up every single restaurant that's right next to him and was so gracious. So yeah, rest in peace, Chef Alex. That was really hard to hear and sad to hear as well.
What a legacy. That's incredible.
All right, Asher, this is one of my favorite segments on a Tuesday. It is our Only in H-Town. Something so wild, something so crazy that it can only happen here in our city. What do you got for us?
I think this is a good one this week. So, as you all know, Beyonce dropped the Cowboy Carter album last Thursday at midnight, Friday morning. We've all been listening to it for the last few days. But the funny thing to me was on Twitter, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee posted a photo that is essentially a remake of the album. Instead of Beyonce riding the White Stallion, it's Sheila Jackson Lee. And that just cracked me up because, I can't really picture her on a horse. It's got the whole American flag behind it, and the whole thing went viral. 1,000 retweets, 12,000 likes. You can decide whether she ought to be taking that album and running with it or not, but either way, I think we can agree that the album itself was incredible. So much
Oh yeah.
versatility of range and just build throughout the 20 some odd tracks, including the Dolly Parton feature and all sorts of good stuff. So yeah, that was my moment of the week.
Oh my gosh, Sheila Jackson Lee recreating that cover or photoshopping it is the most Sheila Jackson Lee thing ever, right? Like just inserting herself into the story, and it's cool. Like she's like, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Is we're gonna have a little fun. But yeah, that album is fantastic. Favorite track so far? Do you have one? Because I do.
Yeah, there are a couple. I think Alligator Tears, really beautiful song, but then by the end, the um, Tyrant with Dolly Parton, I thought it was really good. And I loved how the last couple tracks, they're each songs that kind of have different phases to them in themselves. They kind of build a lot. And
Hmm.
so it was really great.
Really good album. My favorite is Bodyguard, and that song is just a banger. That's the only way to put it. It's a banger.
That one, I was literally washing dishes yesterday, and it was like I was humming it. I didn't know what I was humming, and then I had to figure out which song from the album it was. And then, yeah, it's so good.
It's the most poppy song on the album for sure. All right, Asher, stick with me on this one because only in H Town, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit, well, Texas, will a once in a lifetime solar eclipse featuring the path of totality get blacked out and blocked out by the weather? Of course, the Texas weather is going to come in and mess up this path of totality because it looks like it's going to be really cloudy and even some rain during next week's solar eclipse in the path of totality because of a western low pressure that's moving in. Now, there is a chance, a really small chance, it looks like, that the cloud coverage could blow through faster than expected. But as of right now, Asher, all models are pointing to a cloudy day during this historic path of totality that is moving through Texas. And I was going to go, and I think I'm still going to go, but you won't be able to see anything.
That is such a bummer. And you're right, only in Texas. That's so funny. I mean, I've got the little solar eclipse glasses magnet onto my fridge so that I'm ready. But where were you thinking of going?
I was going to go to San Antonio and then drive up towards Kerrville to get a little bit closer into that path of totality because San Antonio's in it. The north side is, but I wanted to be a little bit into the darker side. I think I'm still going to go because there might be like some glimpses of it, right? We'll see how heavy the cloud coverage is. And it's still going to get dark for 4 minutes, right? It's still going to be pretty cool to experience that. But that moment of seeing the eclipse happen, we won't be able to see it because of the cloud coverage. So that was really sad. And I know, like, for me, that's just a 2.5 hour drive, 3 hour drive, right? There are people who are traveling here and have made plans for the last year or so, and their plans are now going to be, well, canceled almost because you won't be able to see anything.
Right. And from my understanding, this is something that you can't wait it out for the next one in your lifetime. Maybe I'm naive, but I will hold out some hope that the weather can change in an instant. You never really know. If they're predicting it a week out, still might change. Or maybe there will be some clouds that open up for a few minutes while you're out there. So, you got to put yourself in a position to be able to see it if the
Yep.
right circumstances come.
We hope the weather cooperates just a little bit because that path of totality coming through Texas is a once in a lifetime thing. And we hope we can experience that. And I hope people who are traveling here can experience it and they don't leave Texas with a bad taste in their mouth, like this Texas weather, gosh darn it. And who knows, it might just snow. We never know here in Texas. Who knows what happens? Asher, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Raheel. Great to be here.
That was Asher Lehrer-Small. All of the stories we talked about are linked in our show notes. And hey, CityCasters, don't forget, our live taping before the Houston Rockets game is this Friday, and we do have a few tickets left. So check out the information in our show notes for discounted tickets, and I hope to see you there. That will do it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new. Porter, Asher Lehrer...